Thank you very much. I gave my light-hearted, rib-tickling speech to the seminar, so I'm afraid I'll be doing the slightly more serious stuff that I came to say to this larger group. For those of you who aren't aware, it has been in the papers, although not as prominent as when we first adopted the boycott position. My union, the National Union of Journalists National Executive, voted pretty substantially to abandon the boycott position last weekend. It had been asked to write to the TUC to ask it to call a boycott of Israeli goods. The General Secretary wrote to the TUC. The TUC said, no, we're not going to do that. And so the National Executive decided that that would do for the time being. We've done what the annual conference asked us, and we will do no more, which is a good thing in my view, albeit a slightly cowardly way to get to that position. I don't think I really have to persuade anybody here of why we should be sort of organising against boycotts in general. But what I want to talk about is why I think we should be taking trade unions in particular seriously. Because actually, there is something more at stake here than the positions that trade unions might take from one time or another, but the actual health of trade unions themselves. It would be very easy when unions such as mine and others that we've heard about today adopt positions such as the boycott position to dismiss them as a kind of, an irrelevance, something that was important 20, 30 years ago, but that isn't really part of our life these days and can be left to a kind of fanatical extremist rump and that they're best ignored. But, I think actually that's a very considerable mistake. Trade unions in Britain today have 7 million members, quite stable membership actually rising in some parts of the country. And, 7 million, it's less certainly than there was in 1979 at the high water mark, but it's almost certainly 7 times more than all Britain's political parties put together. It's certainly more than the combined total of people who on a weekly basis attend churches, mosques and synagogues. So as a social movement in Britain, I think the size of trade unions is such that they really are something that we can't ignore. It does lead to the question, why are people still in trade unions if they adopt these crazy positions and if some people believe them to be in decline? And the answer, to be perfectly honest, is very simple. People earn more who are members of trade unions. Studies vary, but between 8 and 16% more per annum in unionised workplaces is paid to those people who are members of unions compared to those who are in non-unionised workplaces. There are many other good reasons to be a member of a trade union, but it's the defence and the promotion of people's interests in the workplace that I believe is the single most important. I have a terrible chesty cough, which I just can't stop. I fear it's partly because trade unions are really quite good at those bread and butter issues that their members can sometimes take them for granted. Can sometimes say, well, yes, I'm happy that somebody comes to look after me when I have a disciplinary or a grievance procedure in the workplace. Yes, I'm happy that they undertake my annual wage round. But what goes on at branches or annual conferences is perhaps a little easy to overlook. And the danger with that is that it does leave trade unions to some people at the far fringes of known thought and behaviour. If you look at the representation somebody mentioned earlier of the Communist Party of Britain on Britain's trade union executives, it's massively more than you would expect from their 800 or 900 actual members. Why does that matter? Well, they've set out their position on the Middle East in a succinct leaflet that they're handing out at the moment, which ends with the words, boycott Israeli goods. They're by no means the only ones. And, don't mistake what I'm saying. People who identify themselves as Leninists or call themselves revolutionary socialists can at times be very, very good bread and butter trades unionists. The unfortunate thing is that they will also use their mastery of trade unions' democratic procedures to bend these democratic organisations to some frankly pretty eccentric positions. We've had plenty of examples from 2 or 3 unions tonight, so I won't go into those eccentric positions. But the problem is that left to the devices of people at the further flung edges of politics, trade unions will start to reflect those further flung views. What can we do about that? Well, whenever anybody joins a trade union, they form a compact with that organisation. They should receive a rule book. If they don't receive a rule book, then they'll find it on the union's website, or they can apply to it from head office. And somebody mentioned earlier this sort of surprise of somebody saying, oh, I've looked in the rule book and there's something we can do about this. Well, I mean, I would sincerely recommend to any of you who are in a trade union not to read the rule book from beginning to end, but at least familiarise yourself with where it is, so that, should your union adopt a position that you think is crazy, or should you hear that there's some possibility that they might, you at least know where to look up and find out what it is that you can do about it. Members throughout trade unions need to to exercise more time, energy and initiative in the business of their trade unions if we are to avoid them falling into the hands of people who would adopt this kind of position. Unless people are willing to make a stand when things are first discussed, to go along to branch meetings and to consider standing in elections themselves, then I'm afraid we'll see this situation happening again and again. The cry that one of my own colleagues in the NUJ often throws up is, why oh why won't our members use their skills as journalists when they're looking at who to vote for? Why won't they use the same questioning instincts that they would bring if they were interviewing a politician or considering what a representative of a local authority was saying when people stand for election to their national executive telling them almost nothing about their political background? My union has a long tradition of publishing personal details with election addresses. Why don't more people ring up and say, I like what you're saying about campaigning on pay and conditions, but can I just ask where you stand on the Israeli boycott motion? That would help me decide how I'm going to place my vote. The more people who do become involved in trade unions, the less likely it is that mad positions will be adopted. And that in itself is a good thing. But actually there's a much bigger prize. Because trade unions are organisations that are in control and in the ownership of their membership, the experience of taking part in discussions, of being part of democratically formulating policies and of trying to change the world collectively and together is something from which people can gain such confidence and strength that they'll begin to see other ways in which they can apply that in their life. When they can see that there are things they can do that will change the world around them, in which they can participate, they will become better at engaging in the whole rest of civic society in the world. And I think make the world, begin on the road of making the world a genuinely better place as a result. I hope I've persuaded at least some of you to come along to a few more branch meetings, and I hope to see you again at our annual conference or at branch meetings I might speak to in the future. Thank you very much.